Hi guys, welcome to the channel talking all things Zelda. To commemorate Wind Waker HD turning 10 years old next month, let's talk about its transition to Switch being more than just a port of a 10-year-old remaster. And yes, I found it hard to believe that the remaster of this game is already 10 years old as well, let alone the original being almost 21 years old. You'll want to stick around to hear the exciting ways this classic entry in the series can be made even better on Switch. Let's dive straight into this with the missing content from the original release. Content is often cut from games. It is a natural part of the development cycle, but it is rare for the omissions to be obvious to the player base once they get their hands on a final version. However, following the original Wind Waker's release back in 2002, it quickly became apparent that content had been cut from the game, largely due to memory constraints presented by the GameCube disc's form factor and ever-looming development time deadlines. And I am, of course, talking about the missing dungeons, which, as we know, are a key part of any Zelda experience. And while one of these dungeons is immediately obvious, the suspected other two are less so. Wouldn't this be an incredible opportunity for the Zelda team to really go the extra mile in remaking this game for Switch, or the Switch's successor, by adding the lost content, even though this would mean designing some new elements for the game. But what and where exactly were the missing dungeons? Let's start with the obvious one, Great Fish Isle, where the player heads with the expectation of working through a new dungeon to obtain the third pearl, only to learn that the isle has been destroyed, and instead obtain Nehru's pearl directly from Jabun. No dungeon to be found. Wind Waker is therefore missing a water temple. The closest it comes is the Tower of the Gods, which incorporates a water level changing mechanic for a limited time at the outset of the dungeon, but there's no true water dungeon. And while yes, this game is full of water by the very nature of its overworld setting, water temples have long been a staple of the series. We can infer that the team had hoped to build a dungeon at Great Fish Isle due to the indication of its true size and its placement on the map. A dungeon we later understand had many parts incorporated into the lake bed temple in Twilight Princess, and some suggest even inspired parts of the ancient cistern in Skyward Sword. It made sense to cut this one because cutting either of the first two dungeons would confuse the player base in terms of what to expect from the experience, and as there would only be enough space for two post-Master Sword dungeons due to GameCube disc limitations, cutting either of those two would have seriously damaged the flow of the game. But this wasn't the only content cut. The Fire Mountain and Ice Ring Isle mini dungeons scream of once being fully fledged dungeons, especially by virtue of the fact that two major items are found within: the iron boots and power bracelets respectively. Again, due to disc limitations and development deadlines, these were adapted into mini dungeons, and the team chose to later add some padding with the Triforce quest. Building these into comprehensive dungeons in a remaster with epic new bosses wouldn't even alter the flow and underlying story experience. They could be built relatively easily as self-contained temples. In theory, the designs for these dungeons were incorporated into Wind Waker's successor, as the iron boots feature as a prominent mechanic in the Goron Mines dungeon in Twilight Princess, and the power bracelets may have been part of the initial ideas for Snow Peak Ruins, in the sense that you would need them to lift a heavy looking ball and chain, or to load cannonballs into the cannons. You can certainly see the foundation for the design of this temple stemming from the power bracelets at least. Moving on, let's look at the best parts of the HD adaptation and how they could be reimagined. The touchscreen on the Wii U was one of the best things about the remaster of Wind Waker, and there's no reason they couldn't employ a similar control method here. Just like the Wii U had multiple options. For example, when playing on just the TV with a Pro controller, the Switch could adopt a similar approach. In handheld mode, the developers could momentarily split the screen, moving the two interfaces side by side to give access to map or item selection on the fly, so that we can still experience the joy associated with getting organised by tapping the screen while simultaneously sailing around Wind Waker's glorious open seas. And bring back an optional social element. The message in the bottle feature was such a great concept in the HD version, completely non-intrusive if it wasn't your thing. Much in the same way you can share photos in new Pokemon Snap. Perhaps you could even send your best sunsets with Link, or clips of a great gameplay moment, all for players to find washed up in a bottle on the shores of their own game. A fantastic way for players to connect. And this final addition to a remaster could be huge, and the team would essentially have a blank canvas to work with without having to alter the main overworld of the game, rather Wind Waker's underworld, under the sea. The original plan was to flesh out the world of Hyrule under the waves, but again, size constraints tied the developers' hands, resulting in a simple path housing a few monsters between Hyrule Castle and Ganon's Tower. Descending beneath the waves is still one of the coolest moments in the series. Discovering the ancient land of Hyrule still exists, but this could now, with the processing power available to the developers, be so much more. Let's push the boundaries for a moment. How about actually going to the birthplace of the original sages before entering their respective temples, Kokiri Forest and Zora's Domain? That would be amazing. And perhaps there could be various entry points across the Great Sea, allowing Link to transition beneath the waves in air bubbles. We do see an instance of this in the late game after all, with traversal across Hyrule's field being by way of your trusty steed Epona, perhaps the spirit of whom you could rescue from a mini dungeon, or something akin to Lon Lon Ranch. The opportunities available to a team as creative as the Zelda team are truly exciting to imagine. Wrapping up then, and while I do appreciate any of this actually happening is a long shot, I would love to hear about how you would improve the Wind Waker if you could direct a port to Switch. It's good to sometimes take a step back and reflect on the elements that combine to make previous games such as the Wind Waker incredible experiences. But surely remasters afford us the opportunity to see those experiences perfected, even if some of the ideas are a little far-fetched. And if you share my passion for all things Legend of Zelda, please help me out and hit that subscribe button. I've got lots of great stuff planned. Thanks, have a good one, and catch you next time.